KLM E3 Foxtrot. Dank u wel, fijne avond, ochtend. Ja, hetzelfde.
Bonjour à tous et à toutes les amis simmers et pilotes furaxiens et furaxiennes et bienvenue sur ma chaîne pour cette nouvelle vidéo débrief de l'interview réalisée par FS Elite avec un développeur de chez Lamina Research qui va traiter du rendu et des lumières dans X-Plane 12. Vous allez voir que c'est très sympa. J'ai déjà regardé donc cette vidéo sur Discord. J'ai fait un live donc hier soir. Hier soir on était samedi soir. Je n'ai pas fait de live sur la chaîne, mais j'ai fait un live sur Discord où on a regardé cette vidéo ensemble pour la débriefer. Donc là, je vais le faire maintenant avec vous. Si vous voulez participer, n'hésitez pas à rejoindre le serveur Discord de la chaîne. Vous trouverez bien sûr le lien en haut à droite du bandeau d'accueil de la chaîne. Bon, trêve de blabla, je lance cette vidéo que j'ai sous-titrée et puis j'interviendrai de temps en temps au fur et à mesure du déroulement de la vidéo. C'est parti.
So, welcome everyone to episode 2.5, if you like, to this deep dive into X-Plane 12. You may not know who I am. My name is Jordan. I am part of the FS Elite content creation team. Joining me today is Ben Supnick. Hello, Ben.
Thank you for having me.
Very, very thank you. Oh, thank you for spending some time with me. I know you're not particularly quiet at this time. You must be very busy running up.
It's been a little bit busy.
Tu m'étonnes qu'il doit être très occupé.
Well, so for the viewers of this video, they may have seen your name dotted around, maybe on some release notes here and there. But would you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at Laminar Research?
I'm the product director for the desktop version of X-Plane, but I'm also just one of the programmers who's been with Laminar Research for a while now. I've been working on X-Plane for just about 2 decades, actually.
Ah, ça fait 20 ans qu'il travaille sur X-Plane.
Back around 2000, and I've worked on X-Plane starting with X-Plane 8. So I started working for Austin on scenery, and helped him rebuild the scenery system. And I've been pushing that rock up the hill ever since.
Perfect. And we asked Austin the same question. When you are not deep in coding, what is it you get up to in your spare time?
I'm a dad, so a lot of trying to maintain order in a sea of chaos.
Les parents connaissent ça, la mer de chaos.
Because it is one of the few sports that you play with an airfoil and not a projectile, right? The Frisbee has lift, so it's airfoils at work, and it's a geek sport. Who are we kidding? I play guitar, although I don't have a ton of time to play these days. And like everybody else during the pandemic, I've taken up woodworking and carpentry, because who hasn't?
That's probably the one thing I didn't do in lockdown. So I may pick that up.
If you spend all your time with broken computers doing something where it's just like a piece of wood, there's nothing electronic about it. That's a nice change of pace, right? After looking at X-Plane all day.
Yeah, for sure. I've actually played Ultimate Frisbee, but it's a very energetic sport, and I'm not sure I'm up for that anymore. But that's a good get out. It's a good and get you outside and running around.
It is, and you can actually, if somebody has aviation background, you can actually explain to them, that you bank the Frisbee. The Frisbee has angle of attack. So strangely, the things I've learned from Austin about aerodynamics for X-Plane have actually helped me understand Ultimate Frisbee.
Yeah, and Austin was explaining in a previous episode how intense and how different the rotation of a rotor is compared to an aerofoil of a wing. I imagine you've had many a physics lesson on the rotational speed of a Frisbee.
Yes.
Perfect. So this episode is all about what we do with the data, what we do with that the data that we grab from the platforms that Austin has spoken about in terms of weather and weather creation, and how we put that into the sim. So today we're going to speak about this amazing lighting engine that we've got with X-Plane 12, and how we render the rain, the lighting, and why why some of the challenges around that are around hardware. So just explain to us a little bit about the changes in terms of lighting and sort of the rendering.
La cabine est super belle de l'avion.
To X-Plane 11.
Right, so it's a big rewrite. This is probably one of the largest single sets of changes we've made to the rendering engine ever. At the end of X-Plane 11, we migrated the underlying engine to Vulkan and Metal as our drivers. And that put us in a really good position for where we're going, because these modern drivers let us talk to the graphics card directly in the way that it wants to be talked to. We can see VRAM, we can understand when operations are happening, we can schedule work with a lot of precision, and we totally needed that for X-Plane 12 because we've gone in and rewritten the entire engine, and now we have this we have a firm foundation to do it. Like, this engine wouldn't have been possible without Vulkan and Metal. So what we sometimes talk about internally is the lighting pipeline, which is how do we get from what our artists give us, which is a beautiful 3D model of an airplane with textures and materials, and how do we get from that to the image on the screen? It's a pipeline because we go through a
J'adore, comme vous pouvez le voir sur l'écran, les effets des feuillages sur le reflet des ombres dans le cockpit de l'avion. Je trouve ça tout simplement formidable, super joli.
And that pipeline has been pretty much completely rebuilt. There's things we were doing before that have been modified, but in the end, it's almost a completely new step at every phase. So the new model is high dynamic range the entire way through. So in the past, there was some high dynamic range parts, there was some low dynamic range parts, they would get mixed together, it was kind of whatever the artist could make look good. It's now entirely high dynamic range right until the very end, and we get a final HDR image that then gets mapped down to your display, which is not HDR, right at the last second. It gets tone mapped. In fact, there's different kinds of HDR, right? Because you can go buy an HDR monitor now, right, from Best Buy. It's not that HDR, it turns out. It's better than maybe your LDR monitor, but what it's not as bright as is the sun as outside. And you know that because if you bring your laptop outside, it gets hard to read, right? So when we talk about HDR, what we're actually talking about is what we call scene-referred rendering. And what that means is it's actually really simple, and the numbers that we have for the colors are meant to be the actual physical quantities you'd see outside. So if you would take a light meter and point at that cloud, and it's 11,000 nits for that white cloud shining in the blue sky, that's what we're going to do. 11,000 is the brightness. And everything in the scene we try to do as close to real-world numbers as possible. This is a big change from how X-Plane used to work and how all computer graphics worked, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, because we just didn't have the computing power to do this kind of thing. But we can now be scene referred everywhere until the very end. And that means that we can start simulating light reflection and optical processes and get pretty good results just because the math works, as opposed to having to have the art team tune and polish and tweak. And they're really good at that. I mean, to be clear, they're really good at that. But some effects will work better if everything in the sim is just harmonized from day one. So, for example, you can make shiny things in X-Plane 11, but it was hard to make something really look wet. It never quite looked right. And the reason for that is because in the real world, the sky is much brighter than just about anything on the ground, right? Even a bright thing is not that reflective. The only material out there that really gives you a lot of light back is snow, which is why when you go skiing, you got to have goggles on a sunny day. It's like it hurts your eyes. That's because the sun's albedo, which is the percentage of the light being reflected back, it's something like 80 or 90%. It's almost all the light. But, a gray piece of paper, 18% of the light is being reflected back. That's not that much. So anytime you go outside, the sky is brighter than the ground. And this doesn't seem remarkable to you because you've lived on Earth your entire life, and it's always been like that. But one thing this means is that the reflection in the puddle is going to show a certain amount of that skylight, and it's going to be much brighter than the reflections of the trees in the puddle. And there's a certain look to that you've seen your entire life every time you've seen rain in a puddle. And if those light levels look right, your brain goes, I know what that is. That's rain. It's a rainy day. But if the reflection isn't quite right, you go, I know what that is. That's plastic. That's an oil slick, right? It might look like some other material. So only now, by having all the light levels right in the beginning, can we run them through materials and get a response that's pretty convincing, that's going to look like the real phenomenon. So having that foundation has allowed us to get some of the weather effects to look correct simply by having the puddles have the physical properties of water that we'd want to have. And what we can do is we can program in how much light is reflected off at a certain view angle. And as you move the camera, that puddle is going to become more and less reflective, just like in real life. And that's what makes your brain go, oh, that's a reflection. I've seen that before. When there's a ripple in the puddle and the ripple comes up, the reflectivity changes a little bit from Fresnel's law. And if you code that just right, it looks right. And so that's been probably the biggest change to the pipeline is getting it into these real world scene referred values and keeping it that way all the way through to the end when we tone map. And that lets us have images that come out realistic the first time without a lot of artist tweaking.
Vraiment, vous allez voir l'atterrissage, franchement, avec le terrain humide, vous allez voir ce que ça donne quand je vous dis que ça va en surprendre plus d'un. Je pense qu'il va y avoir beaucoup de sorties de terrain. Donc là, ce qu'il dit, c'est qu'en fait, c'est pas simplement un effet d'eau, c'est que l'eau est vraiment simulée. Hein, ça sera comme la neige et les autres composants de X-Plane. Donc ça, c'est très intéressant.
Obviously, that you mentioned 10, 15 years ago. We just didn't have the computing power to be able to put that into action. How has the last 10 years changed or enabled the changes in X-Plane to happen in terms of computing capability?
Well, we've seen a bunch of things happen. First, we've seen the cards have steadily gotten faster, and unlike CPUs, graphics cards have always been very parallel devices, and so they have kept on racking up more computing power with improvements in physical construction. I've been doing this for a while, and so when I started, the Pentium 4 was considered like a really good CPU. And that goes all the way back to the day when you got one core and it would get faster. And like it went from 200 megahertz to 500 to 1000.
J'ai connu les Pentium 4.
And we didn't write programs for multiple cores because nobody had those. That was exotic. And then one day we woke up and they just wouldn't get any faster. And Intel's like, we can't go any faster, but would you like 2 of them? How about 4? So CPUs have made this change in how they're spending the hardware dividend. But GPUs, a GPU effectively has 1,000 cores, 2,000 cores. They've always had a large number of small compute units, so they can just keep putting more on the die. So we have not seen a fall off in the amount of killing power we get. What we have seen is better ways to use it. So in most modern cards, you can think of this. You can think of these cores almost like an army of worker ants that will swarm a task and finish it off. But what do you do when you're almost done, right? And almost everybody's done working, and there's that one guy finishing up, right? Everybody else is bored. And this is actually a source of wasted computing power on GPUs. You go to draw something, and at the end of doing that drawing job, a little bit of the GPU is finishing up, and the other parts are like, well, we're done. What are we supposed to do? And on most modern GPUs, you can now give the GPU a second thing to do to kind of use up the surplus worker bees who are bored. This is called Async Compute, and NVIDIA and AMD both have it now. And because we're using Vulkan Metal, X-Plane can take advantage of it. So we can find ways to fill in those cracks where maybe we weren't using all of your GPU in X-Plane 11. We can now program that directly, and we have things that we can do with it to better use the hardware. So we're getting a dividend in hardware, but we're also getting more control of it, which maybe lets us use it more efficiently. That's been a nice thing to see, because that wasted compute power at the end of a job was becoming worse as we'd have access to more of these worker bees of these cores. So being able to use that is going to be, I think, really important for us for getting as much as possible out of people's cards. And, unfortunately, graphics cards are expensive these days. This was not the norm 10 years ago. We would see users buy a new top-end card every couple years, and they'd spend all of $600, and that was fine. And now, what does that get you, right? That's a bargain if you can find a mid-tier card for that price. So we're very aware that cards are hard to come by, and so we're going to really try to use every aspect of the card we can and not waste any compute power.
Alors ça c'est très intéressant également ce qu'il dit, c'est-à-dire que là pour le coup ils vont utiliser tous les culs d'accord de nos cartes graphiques. Moi j'ai ma 3080 Ti qui va bien faire le travail je pense pour X-Plane 12, plutôt que d'utiliser le processeur qui est beaucoup plus lent. Et également là ils peuvent, grâce à Metal et Vulkan, parce que c'est deux choses différentes, hein, Vulkan et Metal c'est quelque chose qui fonctionne de la même manière, mais c'est un peu comme quand on disait OpenGL et Vulkan, c'est deux moteurs différents, deux moteurs graphiques différents. L'avantage c'est qu'on n'aura plus cet effet de goulot d'étranglement que l'on a actuellement sur X-Plane 11. On va, une fois qu'un calcul va être terminé, ça va pouvoir être attribué à autre chose et ainsi de suite, et aller beaucoup plus rapidement dans les calculs.
Yeah, and obviously we've now had eyes on the minimum specifications for X-Plane 12, and I personally was quite shocked at the minimum spec is actually quite low. Is that because of this new rendering agent? I guess will X-Plane 12 default to Vulkan and Metal rather than having the option?
Yes, we're only shipping using Vulkan and Metal. We are not shipping OpenGL for our driver. Now, plugins can still use OpenGL. I want to be very clear about that because there's a bunch of plugin authors who have, spent years writing OpenGL glass displays, and I don't want them to go melt down while they watch this. We are continuing to have plugins run in OpenGL, and then that is bridged to X-Plane running natively in Vulkan and Metal. So it's basically as if the Vulkan Metal checkbox was always checked and you couldn't uncheck it. That's the change. And what that means is that when we're coding X-Plane, we know we're going to have that Vulkan driver. We're going to get all the control we get. We can schedule DMAs, or we can schedule second loads of compute, and all those great things we can do with Vulkan. So it allows us to plan for that good case and better use the hardware. Minimal hardware requirements are minimal, right? We don't expect it to look good. We expect it to function. And sometimes that's what people need, right? Maybe they're doing IFR training and they don't actually care what's out the window. Maybe they're designing an aircraft, or maybe they're testing an add-on on the platform other than their main one. Maybe they're doing a physics and engineering simulation. So X-Plane gets used for a lot of different reasons. So we don't want to mandate, well, you will have perfect graphics and you must have a $5,000 video card as the minimum. And I think we'll hit those minimums by a combination of trying to be efficient, but also just turning down the quality, right? And we expect that if you're on a minimum machine, you're not running in 4K, right? Hopefully you're running at 720p. So you've got to do things too. Maybe don't turn all the sliders all the way up.
Alors pareil, là il parle justement que dans X-Plane 12 on n'aura plus de cases à cocher utiliser OpenGL ou Vulkan, ça va être par défaut par Vulkan, mais par contre là où on voit que ce sont des vrais développeurs, pas comme certains qui cassent tout à chaque mise à jour, où les développeurs sont encore obligés à chaque fois de mettre à jour leur module parce que sinon ça marche plus. Eux en fait ils gardent quand même ce qu'on appelle les classes de leur ancien sim, c'est-à-dire que les plugins OpenGL que vous avez en OpenGL vont très bien fonctionner sur X-Plane 12. Pourquoi? Parce qu'ils vont traiter l'OpenGL d'abord et après il y aura une passerelle sur Vulkan qui va permettre de traiter ces images OpenGL sur Vulkan. Donc ça casse pas tout le travail des développeurs et c'est ce qui fait que très certainement beaucoup d'avions qui ont été développés il y a quelques années en OpenGL vont fonctionner sur X-Plane 12. Pourquoi? Parce que le moteur de rendu OpenGL sera toujours là pour pallier à ça, justement comme il dit, pour les développeurs qui ont passé des années à travailler sur X-Plane 11, ne pas leur casser du travail. C'est là qu'on voit que ce sont des développeurs très très intelligents, quoi.
Yeah, which I imagine in this current climate is music to a lot of people's ears. As you said, no one's anyone's willing to pay $5,000 for a card at the moment, let alone half that. So yeah, it's a tough time at the moment, and actually I imagine it's almost quite challenging to get that balance right from a team, and to develop something so graphically intense as something like X-Plane.
Right. We had to make some decisions about what kind of features are always on versus what aren't. So, for example, the weather effects are always on in X-Plane 12. You can't turn off the wet puddles. And that decision was partly made because it'd be hard for third parties to plan their scenery if they don't know what they're going to have. Also, it affects aviation, right? It'd be a little strange to land and the runway looks dry and then you go hydroplaning all over the place. So effects that affect pilots often have very high priority. Usually what we try to do with the settings is turn on and off settings that only affect what you see, but not how you understand the environment, and also turn down the quality of effects that have some dial. So maybe the clouds can be sharper, or maybe they can be a little bit fuzzier, right? That's a setting we can easily change, but there are still clouds. We're not going to take the clouds away because now your IFR landing is a VFR landing. That's much easier, right? So that's an example of something where, it's pilot facing and therefore it has priority. X-Plane 12 is also the deferred HDR pipeline all the time. So in X-Plane 11, that's the top two settings on the effects. We're always deferred. And the reason for that is because we can't do the weather effects without that pipeline. And it's also just a better pipeline for most of the kinds of effects we're trying to do. So trying to develop a forward renderer for the kind of graphics that we were developing would have taken a lot of time and frankly just not worked as well, and it might not have been any faster. So we've tried to simplify and focus on one set of configurations for some features, and then we can just try to tune the heck out of them as best we can, because anything we can do to make it faster is good for everybody. It's good for the low-end users, but it's good for the VR users. It's good for somebody who has multi-monitor. Faster is more. So, we're going to tune as much as we can.
Yeah, perfect. So we spoke about the implementation of things on the ground a little bit. How does the rendering engine manage things in the air? Obviously, this is the first time we've seen volumetric clouds, and in the past, they tend to be very performance heavy. How have you really integrated this into X-Plane 12?
Right. So the cloud rendering engine is completely new. Up through X-Plane 11, it was particle billboards. So it's small pictures in 3D space, like they are arranged in 3D, always facing you to hopefully look like a cloud. And now what we're doing is we're tracing through a volume of moisture to understand the optics as we march through it. It's the new implementation is fundamental. It's always running. And what we can do is we can transfer Austin's physics definition of the clouds to the graphics card as 3D volumetric data, because the graphics card is sophisticated enough that it can do a bunch of analysis of this on its own. There's actually some good things about ray marching. So when you're drawing the billboards, they all stack up on top of each other. And it turns out that's actually really bad for the graphics card, because the graphics card has, imagine your 20,000 worker ants all taking a task and doing something, and then they all want to go into one little ant hole. Imagine a tiny hole and they're all trying to get in. That ant hole is the memory bus, trying to take the color of the cloud and commit it to memory so that you get to see it. That's a bottleneck, and that's actually what would slow down the old clouds. And this is not something that's getting any better on graphics cards, being able to draw 20,000 things all stacked up. So users would see with X-Plane 11, low frame rates, and their GPU would be saying it's not very busy, and they'd be like, "What are you guys doing? I'm getting 5 FIPS and my GPU's bored."
C'est ce que je vous disais tout à l'heure, c'est le goulot d'étranglement, ce qui nous arrive souvent. Hein. On est à 20 FPS, 30 FPS et on voit son GPU qui tourne à 50%, 60%, on ne comprend pas pourquoi. Mais là, vous avez l'explication du développeur, c'est ce qui fait que c'est le goulot d'étranglement de la configuration actuellement d'X-Plane 11, donc là qui va être très certainement résolu sur X-Plane 12 avec les nuages volumétriques. Déjà ça va être plus joli et apparemment ça va être plus performant, et ça c'est vraiment cool.
How did this happen, right? I'm getting nothing and it's slow. ray marching is actually a much better way to do it because it's a computational task, and everything about a single column of light gets summed up computationally, and then we only need to send it to memory once. So it's a better way to talk to the graphics card. You know, it's using more computing power, but that's something the graphics cards are giving us more of. So we can march the volume, and we can also we do some preparation to speed that process up. So we create we don't just have a 3D model of the clouds, but we have a 3D model of where there are clouds, so that if you have a bunch of clear air, we can shoot through that really fast and go, blue skies, we're done here. Or you hit a cloud, and well, now we can say, you know what? You're socked in, it's IFR, there's nothing to do. So once you get into the cloud, again, maybe we can get out early and save some GPU time. So we have tricks we can do to speed up that process. But it's also, it's a technique I like because it produces correct results pretty much always, right? As the camera goes into and out of clouds, it looks like what you would see in the real airplane perfectly. There's no need to just fade the screen to white. That code's been deleted. Right? And when you come out and you get down to the approach lights, you see whatever you're going to see, depending on how much visibility there is below the clouds, depending on whether any clouds are hanging out or not. So pilots should get a very realistic IFR experience, and the rendering engine just gives that to you by design, which is nice to see. In the old system, we had to spend a lot of time trying to get the pictures of clouds to be in the right place for IFR training, because professional training is a big part of what X-Plane is used for. So it's nice to be able to just set the weather up and say, this is where the deck is. One of the things we had to make sure of is that the precision at the bottom of the clouds is very precise, because there's a huge difference between coming out of the clouds right above the decision height, seeing the runway lights and flying in, and getting down to the decision height, you got no lights, and now you're going to go do the missed approach procedure, right? Like, that's actually something you might need to train for. So we couldn't have a cloud system where you say, I want the clouds at 190 AGL, and you get 150 because we round it, right? It has to be more precise than that. So we actually had to design a representation on the GPU that wouldn't just look nice, but would have this very high precision for the bases of the clouds, and that's an aviation-specific thing.
Amazing. It's it actually adds that element of I won't say fear, but I guess,
c'est vrai que la visibilité c'est très très important, et effectivement ça pour les altitudes de décision ça va être aussi très très important de savoir à quelle distance tu vas avoir les lumières, les effets, le fait de passer à travers un nuage et d'en sortir petit à petit, ça va être très sympa, et ça va changer également la donne pour les remises de gaz, ce que j'ai pas l'habitude de faire. Moi je me pose généralement, mais je suis pas très bon au niveau des atterrissages. Donc allez, on continue.
That's quite a scary thing, getting to that point and visually, and that immersion takes you to that point where, traditionally I would sometimes go, I've only got half an hour left before I need to go away and do something, so I'll just carry on. I know the runway is there. But,
I've had IFR pilots tell me that when you see those lights, when it's really socked in, it's like Christmas. Like, I can land.
C'est comme Noël quand tu vois les lumières.
Yeah. So I mean that's something I really can't wait.
Ah là là, regardez franchement, je reviens un tout petit peu en arrière et regardez ces colonnes de nuages. C'est très très beau. J'ai hâte de rentrer dedans justement. Moi mon but va être de rentrer dans ces nuages pour voir ce que ça fait.
I really can't wait for that. That just sounds intense, but also a little bit scary. Perfect. So obviously we were talking that snow is one of the most reflective things. In X-Plane 12, we have had precipitation in the past for X-Plane 11, but how does X-Plane 12 really hone in on those seasons and the snow and the precipitation and water?
Right. So first of all, snow is not a season. Snow is a weather effect, right? And as somebody from New England in April who hasn't put the snowblower away yet, we are very aware that that snow is not a season. It's a thing that happens. So we do have seasonalization of our art assets. So the sim knows what date it is, and it can load different art assets based on the date, and it can also crossfade between them to create intermediate results, as foliage develops. And our scenery data has the day of the year for the seasonal boundaries encoded into it spatially. So, here in New England, fall comes earlier the more north you get. It gets colder, there's less daylight, you'll get the trees turning. And if you were to fly, from Vermont down to, say, Washington, D.C., you might fly from the foliage region down to green trees as you go south. And X-Plane can simulate that because the seasonal boundary is actually on a per location basis. Or if you go to the southern hemisphere where everything's upside down, it will know that it's December and it's summer, ecologically speaking, because that's what's encoded into the files. So that's entirely new to the engine. That is a low frequency effect because it takes time, a lot of time, for the seasons to change. So when you load your flight, we can set the flight up based on what you've set for the date and time. The weather effects are all completely dynamic because you can be flying and the weather turns on you and you might get rain, and then the rain can turn to snow because the temperature drops. So all of those effects are being applied dynamically based on data that's coming into the sim from the weather simulation, almost on a per frame basis. So if it starts to rain, you'll see the puddles build up and develop on the runways over time. And if you leave it sunny and you leave your computer alone, eventually you'll come back and it will dry itself out. So the scenery system has been extended to let authors mark up on their textures where the weather effects might happen first. So you need to know, like, well, this is the low spot in the asphalt, here's a crack in the pavement, it's going to stay wet a while. And so we get these annotations, and then we use logic on the GPU to actually apply more or less weather. If you put it in debug mode, you can make the puddles go and grow in and out because it's happening in real time. It's being computed as you fly.
Ça c'est vraiment cool en fait, hein, comme il explique. Il va y avoir les saisons dans X-Plane, mais c'est pas des saisons bêtes qui vont être en fonction du mois. Ça va être vraiment en fonction de la météo, c'est-à-dire que si, comme il dit, vous allez dans le nord de la planète, par exemple, vous n'aurez pas, c'est pas parce que c'est l'été chez nous que ça sera l'été là-bas. Donc c'est vraiment ce qu'ils appellent les saisons écologiques. C'est au niveau de du temps, de l'humidité, que ça va s'appliquer, et vous n'allez pas avoir simplement des rendus été, hiver, automne. Ça va pouvoir être fusionné, par exemple, entre l'automne et l'été, où les feuilles commencent à tomber. Vous allez avoir des couleurs différentes, mitigées. Ça va être très beau. Moi, je pense que vraiment, on va se régaler.
That's incredible. And actually, you mentioned being in New Hampshire, having snow. I'm based in London in the UK, and it's been snowing for the last 3 days, which is absolutely unheard of.
Il neige à Londres, non, sérieux, depuis 3 jours, ce qui est absolument inouï. Ah oui, d'accord, ok.
So it's just a very strange thing. The addition of some new visuals that we have seen in the cockpit in the form of I would call it 3D water rather than just an effect.
Oui, effectivement, ça va être de l'eau 3D, ça va pas être un simple effet d'eau.
Explain 11 via some plugins, but this is now native to Explain 12.
Right. We actually started with Sazo's librain library. He made an MIT X11 open source library, and he said to us at one point, like, you should take this and put it to sim. So we started there, and that was a huge help. Since then, it has been heavily rewritten because now that it's inside the sim, there's some stuff we can do that he couldn't. So when you used to do this in X-Plane 11, you'd have a little config file and you'd say where you want the drops to go. We have full access to the flight model, so we actually build a vector force field around the airplane based on where the engines and the wind are, and then the raindrops, which are all 3D particles being simulated on the GPU, they're affected by those forces. So per frame, we're going to send to the GPU a summary of what we got off the physics model, and then it's going to push the raindrops based on the physical shape of the model and based on what the engines are doing. And the nice thing about it is we can do almost all of this based on stuff we already knew about the airplane, because our art team and third parties are already modeling the airplane in 3D, so we know where that windscreen is. And we know if the doors are open, we have the animations. So we can provide this very realistic movement of the raindrops that interact with the physics model. And it's not more work for the art team, which is good for our art team. Like, they've got a lot to do anyway. But I think it's also good for the third-party community, because as computers have gotten more and more powerful, we've started demanding more and more from our third-party aircraft. So when I started this, one person could create a full X-Plane 6 aircraft in about 3 months. And that was everything. That was the flight model, that was the textures, that was the 3D model, that was everything there is to do. And now it's, several man years of a team per airplane. So when we add new features, I try to think about, is this going to make it harder for the art team? Because now they're going to have to do even more work. Now we simulate coffee makers. You have to make coffee pots, everybody, more work. Or can we do something automatically that they used to do by hand so it will be less work? And so one of the things I like about the rain feature is that because we leverage the 3D they've already done, you get a lot of visual pop for not that much work per airplane, right? Because we can use the existing surfaces and still get something that's very dynamic.
Ça, c'est bien.
And is
C'est bien.
that sort of library system, or the base of that system, only focused on the aircraft, or have you taken anything from that and pushed it to the wider world of X-Plane?
So far, it's only for the aircraft. All these things, we look at them and we say, we could do this for the ground trucks. We start on the airplane first because it's by far the star of the show. Right?
Bien sûr, bien sûr. C'est l'avion qui est important. Les véhicules au sol, on va dire qu'on s'en fout un peu, quoi.
And starting with X-Plane 12, Fmod sound is now available for some of the scenery objects. So previously it was just airplanes that could have the sound, but in X-Plane 12, all the ground vehicles have their own sound as well. And third parties that add dynamic objects that move to the sim, they have access to the same sound system. So that's one example where something that started as just for the airplanes, now it's becoming more ubiquitous.
Ça, c'est cool.
Yeah, amazing.
Les véhicules au sol vont avoir des F-modes. Ça, c'est bien.
Was,
ça va être plus d'immersion.
Episode, I believe, around the environment and the environmental sounds. If you're in the forest, you can hear the trees waving in the wind, and you can hear the crickets, and then when you shut an aircraft door, that goes away. It sounds...
Yeah, Daniela did a fantastic job, and as a developer, I have the sound off a lot of the time because when you break into the code, the sound will loop and it gets really annoying. So I got the headphones off, and every now and then I'll put them on. I'll just realize I've been sitting there for 3 minutes just walking around listening to the waves. It's very immersive, and then I realize, I got to get work done, and I take the sound back off again.
Yeah, and we will definitely delve very...
Alors Daniela, elle est assez connue dans le monde d'X-Plane, elle fait beaucoup de sons F-mode et je crois que d'ailleurs, je ne sais pas si c'est elle qui travaille pour Aérobas, qui travaille aussi avec Aérobas, qu'il faudra que je vous confirme ça, mais Daniela, vous avez dû entendre son nom assez souvent sur les F-mode dans X-Plane, voilà, c'est une artiste, c'est une artiste du son.
Deep into the sounds of X-Plane 12 in a later episode. Just finally, we've obviously mentioned lots around the what you've changed in X-Plane 12 in terms of environment, and you also mentioned around putting your mind towards the third party developer. Where do you see the third party developers slotting in terms of environment in X-Plane 12?
First of all, I think a lot of the things that they've been doing in the past are still completely applicable, right? So custom scenery, custom airports, just adding detail to the world with a ton of attention. The thing that third parties have always been able to do that Laminar, almost by our business model, can't, is pick a specific aspect and just drill down into more detail, right? Because we've got to set the canvas for everything. And so we can't pick one thing and say, well, we're just going to make this one airport the greatest airport. We've got thousands of others to worry about. So I think that's just as applicable to 12 as before, if not more so, because the sim can be more realistic. We do not yet have a published API for interacting with the new weather system, but it's something that we're going to do. We just haven't figured out what that API is yet, because the new weather system can take a ton of information, right? It really takes weather information in 4 dimensions, because not only is it different in space across like north, south, east, west, and altitude, but the weather changes over time. So you can actually give us here's the morning weather across this whole region, and here's the afternoon, and I want to see the storms develop. So that's an area where I think there's a lot of potential for contribution because the engine can do so much. It is a tricky API for us to do, though, because saying what the weather is a lot more complicated than it used to be. It used to be you could just give us a list of METARs and we're done, right? That's all there is. And now it's this 4-dimensional data set, right? And that's a lot of information, and plugin authors will probably have very specific ways they want to work with it. So that's an area where I think there's going to be new things we can do that we weren't able to before. We'll have to see what else third parties want to do, we try to listen to their requests for APIs and for extensions. Some of the things we're going to get into 12.0. There's a number of new techniques for the scenery system that we've gotten in. Some of them are going to have to wait for 12.1. We're going to try and get to them as soon as we're shipped. But I suspect that when people try them, we'll get requests that we didn't think of, and we'll have to figure out what to do.
Yeah, amazing. And one thing that really sort of goes so hand in hand with the platform of X-Plane is the community that really pull together and develop X-Plane. We've got the scenery library that the community bring, and every now and again, every update, there's incorporations of that into the shipping of X-Plane. And actually, it makes it a really great platform, and I think everyone involved in that feels like they're contributing something to something bigger than what they're producing, which is
absolutely.
really great.
Effectivement.
How have you managed all of the requests from the community, and like you were saying, for the APIs and things like that, but also from an internal point of view? Austin was almost saying in another episode that you are like you said earlier, you almost bring control over the chaos of all of those requests and items that people want to include in X-Plane 12. How have you managed to draw the line from X-Plane 11.5 and a little bit to X-Plane 12?
It can be like herding cats at times. We try to track everything. So if somebody files a bug or has a comment, we try to make sure we don't lose track of these things, and we have an internal roadmap for where we want to go with X-Plane. So we've had a roadmap for what's going to be in X-Plane 12 that we try and keep updated, but we also have a big pile of what we want to do after 12 ships, right? Because 12.0 is not the end of X-Plane. And so we try to accumulate these things. And then once you can see all these different requests people have, we try to group them so they make logical sense. So for example, VR, right? In X-Plane 11.20, we did VR, and we have a bunch of different requests for VR, and it probably makes sense to do them all at once in a VR 2.
Je sais pas si vous avez vu en arrière-plan, franchement, la cabine avec les oreillers dans l'avion est magnifique. J'ai trouvé ça magnifique hier soir avec des abos. C'est vraiment superbe. Les effets de lumière, de reflets.
Where we can simultaneously support OpenXR drivers, support some of the new professional headsets, provide new plugin APIs so that people can interact with the VR system in a more creative way. We want to do those things all at once, right? Because we wouldn't want to create a plugin API for VR and then immediately screw it up by changing to OpenXR, right? We want to have some coherent set of things that we can do efficiently. So once we gather up a series of features, then we can say, okay, here's a medium-sized initiative we can do. Maybe it'll be for an update or something like that. And so we've already got some of those things that we want to do after 12.0. They're starting to form and take shape. We have a feature request voting board that people can contribute to. And actually, I thought it was a good sign that probably 4 of the top 5, maybe 5 of the top 5 requested features on that before X-Plane 12, they were what was in our internal list is, oh my God, we have to do those things, which I think was an indication that where we were internally imagining the product going and what our users wanted, we're in pretty close harmony. I mean, everyone was like, new clouds, we need new clouds, right? That was up on the voting board. We knew we were going to do it. But we do try to look at that stuff as well and make sure we're not missing things across all aspects of the sim. We get feedback from professional customers as well, and they have specific needs, and we try and see if, will this professional feature also help our users? Is there something that home users are using that professional customers would like? And we also try to design keeping the mobile product in mind, and is the mobile product doing something that the desktop app can do? So, for example, the mobile app has a flight planner built in. You can specify a route in using the map. It might be nice to have on the desktop version. Right now, you can fly with ATC, but if you want to make a flight plan, you got to go search the internet. So I think there's a lot of room for cross-pollination across all the different versions of X-Plane as well.
Yeah, and Austin touched on that when he was speaking about, his ultimate goal for X-Plane would be, almost an amalgamation of both of those, having a
le cross-platform
that everyone is flying on, and then the X-Plane mobile version will have the weather and all the lovely things that are coming to X-Plane 12 moving over to that, which I'm sure would be exciting for everyone involved.
Yeah, there are some things that are hard to do on the mobile platform because wattage is just an absolute law of physics, right? There's a difference between a computer that uses a quarter of a watt and a computer with a 700-watt power supply. But desktop users may not realize how monstrously fast mobile devices have gotten.
Ah si, les appareils mobiles, il a raison, les appareils mobiles sont devenus vraiment ultra puissants. Essayez serait-ce de simuler sur votre PC, d'installer un émulateur pour simuler réellement les fonctionnalités d'un smartphone de dernière génération. Vous allez voir que même si vous avez une bonne machine, vous allez vraiment avoir du mal à émuler, plutôt à simuler, je veux dire à émuler le smartphone. C'est vrai qu'aujourd'hui on a des appareils mobiles qui sont monstrueux au niveau de la puissance. Quand on pense que dans la première navette spatiale, ils avaient moins de puissance de calcul que ce qu'on a d'un smartphone de base aujourd'hui, c'est quand même impressionnant. Donc effectivement, maintenant on fait tout tourner sur smartphone, quoi. Il y a quasiment plus de différence entre des smartphones et des PC de bureau, quoi.
Came out with the M1 chips, and everyone went, "Oh my God, that chip is really fast. Apple's making chips as fast as Intel and AMD." That chip is a big version of what they have in their phones. So we were seeing the mobile version of X-Plane, which runs the full desktop code, absolutely screaming on, an iPhone 11, an iPhone 12. We could sort of see this coming, that, the days where the phone was a toy that you really had to tune your code for were gone. So, if you go back, 5 or 6 years, we'd have some code for desktop. We think it's pretty good. We bring it to the phone and it would be sluggish. And we go, we didn't do a great job of coding this. Let's really tune it up. And that was good for desktop too. But now the phones cut through this stuff like butter. So, we're running the same physics on both platforms. So I don't see why they couldn't fly together, because they can be sharing the same flight dynamics and the same scenery data. So I think there's a lot of room for sharing. There is basically no gap between the very nicest phones and the very lowest end laptops. They completely overlap at this point.
Oui, je me suis peut-être un peu emballé. C'est vrai qu'il a raison. Il reprend, il dit qu'il y a très peu de différence entre les smartphones haut de gamme aujourd'hui et les ordinateurs portables quand même entrée de gamme. C'est vrai que quand même, si on va sur des gros PC gamers, on n'a quand même pas la même puissance.
Yeah, it's an incredible shift that we've seen in the last sort of 6 years or so. It's really exciting to see what the future holds. So just to kind of wrap up then with you, Ben, if you were to choose one of the new features, and we'll include individual aircraft in this, if you could choose one as your top feature that you're implementing in X-Plane 12, what would you choose?
Oh, that's really hard. I got to pick one?
Afraid so.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tempted to pick the water. I think that's just because I've been working on it today, and so I've been like staring at the waves. I'm like, oh, so I've been working today on getting the water to look tropical in the tropics, and we've had extensive internal discussions of why is the water aqua in Bermuda, and so we pull down the actual the bathymetric data, the depth of the floor under the ocean, and it turns out the color of the water, it's what you're really seeing is the depth. Right? Those really bright blue parts, they're shallow. right? That's why you're seeing them, is because the light can make it all the way through the water, bounce off the sand, and come back again. And you're not just seeing the light be extinguished and just seeing sky reflection. And getting this data in, we're, we'll see how today goes, but it looks like it's really close. So that feature's been really fun. Plus the airplane physics respond to the 3D water. And we've had real seaplane pilots flying these things and tuning them. So I've enjoyed just landing the airplane in the water and watching it slosh around. I found that to be very enjoyable.
Moi aussi, je vous avouerai, les amis, que j'ai vraiment très hâte de tester les hydravions, parce que sur X-Plane 11, je ne fais pas d'hydravion, mais dès que X-Plane 12 va sortir, vu la qualité de l'eau, vu ce qu'il va y avoir autour, et puis la simulation, honnêtement, je vais me mettre à l'hydravion, on s'y mettra ensemble, parce que je vous ferai des petits tutos, comme d'habitude, hein. Je me renseignerai au mieux sur le pilotage d'un hydravion, et puis je vous le reporterai, parce que ça, c'est quand même super sympa de pouvoir amérir. Ça, c'est très cool.
Tough to pick just one, though.
Yeah, sorry about that. Well, it's good. It's a good choice. I think the water in X-Plane has traditionally been a subject of contention almost. And this
is actually the third time that we are attempting to make the water 3D. We had it working in various test code and experiments in the past, but there's a huge difference between, look at this, I have this neat demo, and we can ship it in the sim. It's fast enough, it doesn't have bugs, it works with third parties. I think we're in good shape this time. With Vulkan, we can solve problems that we couldn't solve before. So we just got a big list of bugs to work through.
As ever, I am sure. Ben, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you're a very, very busy man. We look forward to the release of X-Plane 12. But for now, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Jordan.
Et voilà, donc on est à la fin de l'interview, hein. On a vu que ça va être super sympa, tous ces effets de lumière, de rendu, de l'eau, de la neige, tout ça, ça va être très sympa, et franchement, moi j'ai hâte que X-Plane nous sorte pour le tester en votre présence. Les amis simmers et pilotes furaxiens et furaxiennes, on en a terminé avec ce débrief vidéo 2.5 rendering et lighting de chez FS Elite, qui a interviewé donc un des développeurs de chez Laminar Research. Si comme d'habitude mon travail vous a plu, mettez un petit pouce bleu vers le haut, ça fait plaisir, abonnez-vous à la chaîne, et bien sûr cliquez sur la cloche des notifications pour recevoir les notifications des vidéos et des lives à venir. Bien entendu, vous pouvez également me suivre sur ma chaîne Twitch, sur Facebook, sur Twitter et sur Instagram. Je vous ai mis tous les liens en description de la vidéo, n'hésitez pas à vous abonner. Les amis simmers et pilotes furaxiens et furaxiennes, une seule chose à vous dire, prenez soin de vous, de vos proches, de tout ce que vous aimez. Moi je vous fais de gros bisous, je vous dis à bientôt, bye bye et fly safe.